you're very gloomy. I mean, on the one hand, you think the government's job is to regulate it, but on the other hand, you're sort of, let us say, pessimistic, if not cynical, about government's chances for actually regulating successfully.
It's been very difficult. Well, first of all, we had a long commitment in this country to self-regulation. And much of the legislation that Franklin Roosevelt came up with, including setting up the New York Stock Exchange, the SEC, contemplated that there would be a sort of professional ethic among classes of lawyers, of people in the stock exchange, and that they could rely on honorably to administer the affairs of that, not unknown in the City of London. And it turned out that self-regulation just doesn't work. Then the question is, can you have direct regulation when you have political direction half of the time telling the people, don't enforce any laws? I mean, President Reagan, for whom I worked and for whom I have great affection, would always say, government isn't the solution, government's the problem. And for people like me who were appointed to offices by him and to regulate, people were quite upset over the fact that I actually regulated. I enforced the law. Indeed, lawsuits that I was bringing when I was running the pension office and the secretary in the Office of Labor, the White House canceled them. So you have political direction that varies between saying we want to have a lot of regulation and we don't. But what are the poor guys in the agency supposed to do? And the answer is they survive and they get their pensions. But that produces a level of best mediocrity and worst corruption.
Well, in the case of the Mines and Minerals Service,
Yes.
that you fax back approval within 30 seconds of arrival of thousands of pages of proposal on safety in the Gulf. It's a classic case of the disasters. So, why would anyone want to invest in the equity markets with all of the cautions and worries that we're talking about here?
Well, I suppose you compare it with their nearest equivalent, like horse races and gambling casinos. It is a method of sort of evaluating a given number of imponderables and taking your chances as to whether you're going to win more often than you lose.
But the bookmaker always wins.
The bookmaker seems to always win, and in this case, the brokers always seem to win.
Yes.
So you pick your poison.
Well, the brokers get the commission when you buy, they get the commission when you sell.
And they get the commission when you die.
And it's a fixed commission, not usually a percentage of the value, so they're not tied to it.
Well, and they're forever, and the various instruments go up and go down.
So let's take it back to the book. You're an investor, you're sort of looking at the book, and you're not going to throw darts at the Wall Street Journal stock pages. What should people be looking for?
Well, it's very difficult to argue with the conclusion that has been made that index funds, which I've referred to earlier, which are an amalgam of the market as a whole, the indexes outperform all but a very few of the managers every year. And they have far lower costs, and therefore the net to the investor of buying an index fund year in and year out compares very favorably with all but the most gifted investors. The most gifted investors invest for themselves. They don't invest for you. So as a practical matter, as an outsider, an index fund is about the best you'll get.
Since it's the job of investor relations officers to sell their companies, and their primary duty is to their company, do you think they have a fiduciary responsibility or a moral responsibility to the investors as well? I mean, should an investor relations officer actually resign if he knows that he's selling pigs in a poke, or he's doing snake oil in Brooklyn Bridge, or he suspects his CEO is?
I think the investment relations is a profession, and they ought to act like professionals. And as professionals, they should not knowingly do harm. And they're not obligated to be perfect, but they are obligated not to mislead people. And at the point they're uncomfortable, they really have no alternative but to resign, because they cannot live long enough knowingly to mislead people. And at the point that they become uncomfortable with what they're doing, they really do have no choice but to resign.
Do you know many who have?
I don't, actually. I'm not terribly familiar, but I've had a very good impression. Generally, you see the good news about the requirements for massive disclosure of information is that it is entirely possible and even responsible to suggest that people can inform themselves. And at a certain point, that's not true, and that's when the information is distorted or relevant information is withheld. But if the information officer makes sure that the public information out there is comprehensive and gives a fair view of the company, it's very difficult for an investor to take exception with what a person says.
And, well, some of the great scandals, in fact, were hidden in the small print of the annual reports and the quarterlies that nobody ever looked at, weren't they? The Tyco and the others.
Oh, there are many cases where the information actually was there. It just was so difficult to find it. It was sort of reminded you of what we're once told of classical times when the laws in Rome were all carved in stone, but they were all put on the portals over the top, so people could barely read them.
Yeah, and that's
Well,
alpinists.
So we've had really the reverse here, that there's so much data and it's so small. For example, I recall I was involved with companies. This was a company called Waste Management, and Waste Management was a company in the engineering business that was losing a great deal of money but was reporting profits. And the reason they were reporting profits could have been found at the bottom of a footnote, which said, we have a surplus in our pension funds, which is being amortized, period. That meant that. They, for a whole bunch of funny reasons, they had money that was thought of as being extra, strange today. And that money was being claimed as current earnings. And they alluded to the fact, without putting any numbers, without allowing you to make any connection. So, you know, if a bloke was a magician, he could have read that and figured it out. But if he wasn't a magician, he'd lost a lot of money on the stock.
You know, and a lot of people did, didn't they?
A lot of people did, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Jack.
You're very welcome.